We now move to the second part, and perhaps we can say the more personal part of Father Fuentes is the way of forgiveness. Whereas in the first part, we were looking more at, we could say, general abstract notions of what forgiveness is, what forgiveness isn't. In this second part, it's more of a going through the process of forgiveness for me. And so here we'll say that it becomes more of an interior work of forgiveness. Now we know that forgiveness is both a great grace, that it provides a great peace, but it's also something that requires our effort. It doesn't just happen to us. And so as we go through this process, Father Fuentes will have us meditating on Scripture, study, and going through the work of discovering our resentments and what it is that we need to do in order to forgive. As a reminder, while here we share fundamental principles and points, it's highly recommended to go through the book yourself, to read through the meditations, to spend time going through the different points that are given in order to help you on this path to forgiveness. In this way, we can say that we truly work, assisted by God's grace, our way to forgiveness. It's also very important for us to note that this is not something that happens in a short talk, in a day, or even a few days. The process of forgiveness takes time, and so we have to be committed to doing this. We can also think of it in a sense like the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, in that there's an order and a process based on a true understanding of the human person that is meant to aid us in this process. In this video today, we're going to focus on two main points that Father Fuentes brings up. The first, discovering resentment, and the second, wanting to forgive. So, first point, discovering resentments. Before we can conquer or overcome something, we must know what it is. We have to be able to name it. Otherwise, we are just fighting the air. We can think of the same way as the particular examination of conscience, how in order for us to beat our dominant defect, in order to work against it with a contrary virtue, we have to know what our dominant defect is, not just abstractly, but in the concrete. What is the thing that's pulling me into sin? What's drawing me into problems? And it's the same way here. Who do I need to forgive? What do I need to forgive? Why do I need to forgive? For some, it can be very obvious. There may be a wound from a parent or a loved one or a friend. For others, it may not be so easy. And this is where we have to bring up the idea of discovering the resentments. Some may even think, this doesn't apply to me. I've forgiven everyone around me. I don't have any resentments. In order to see if that's true or not, we have to look for we can say the symptoms of resentment. And what might those be? Am I envious? Jealous? Am I disagreeable? Do I complain? These and other behaviors like them are often an indicator of some sort of concealed anger or resentment. And it may not be obvious to us at first, which is why we need to really work through and see, to be honest, and try to determine concretely who I am or might be angry with. Is it myself? My neighbor? Is it perhaps even God? Do I have some sort of resentment without even knowing it? Then we can ask, is it a good or a bad anger? Or we can say, is it a justified anger? Is this something that is based on something? Which we can also understand more by a qualitative understanding of it. That is, what wound do I attribute to these people? Or what is the damage done to me? What are the circumstances of this event? For example, when, where, why, how did this thing happen? I need to make it concrete. I need to give flesh to this idea. It cannot just be an abstract, oh, someone was rude to me. No, this thing happened. What was it? Or these series of events happened to me in my life. And then, very important, an objective determination. That is there evidence of this? We talked earlier about real wounds and imagined wounds. Is this something indeed real? So let us ask ourselves these questions as we go through the work of forgiveness. Briefly, we can mention we talked earlier about this in a more of an abstract way, about the consequences of resentment. We can consider the idea of psychological consequences, behavior, social consequences, physical, spiritual. But what are the consequences in my life? Am I obsessing over some wound done to me? Am I becoming withdrawn from my friends? Am I breaking out into anger? There can even be physical reactions to having resentment. Or perhaps is there a spiritual wound where it's causing even a kind of blindness or a vindictiveness that destroys my view of God? So we have to pray to God for the grace to bring light to us, that we can see what it is that we need to forgive. And as we saw in earlier videos, there's no other solution to grudge than Christian forgiveness. And we can read from the book of Sirach a very illuminating verse. It says in chapter 27, verse 25 and on, "Whoever throws a stone straight up throws it on his own head, and a treacherous blow opens up wounds. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and he who sets a snare will be caught in it. If a man does evil, it will roll back upon him, and he will not know where it came from." The only way to solve the root of resentment is by Christian forgiveness. We must be convinced of this, that the way that I can forgive is through Christian forgiveness. Our second point is the idea of wanting to forgive or willing to forgive. And the first point that Father Fuentes brings up is this idea of stimulating our will. We can think of the Our Father. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. We can ask ourselves, what is the state of my will? Am I ready to forgive? Do I want to forgive? Or would I prefer to live enslaved to my anger and resentment? And sometimes we can get caught up in these notions and these ideas. And so a concrete story can help bring this to life for us. And Father Fuentes, in the Way of Forgiveness, he brings up the story of persecution of Christians in China, where there was a family in a town, there was a family of 8 Christians, and during one of the persecutions, everyone in the family was killed except for the grandparents who were not there. And the grandfather, when he returns and he sees his family killed, is of course distraught. He's almost going crazy. He cannot believe the horror and the destruction of this. Several months later, the very killer, who, to make matters even more personal and difficult, who was one of the grandfather's own students, decides to seek refuge back in the town. The Christians tell the grandfather, look, the killer is coming back and we must accept him, this idea of hospitality. And the grandfather is something very difficult for him. It's a physical reaction, this horror that's happened to him. But he says, either we are Christians or we are not. And he says, this is no small task, but I will try. That is, I will work. I will seek to forgive. And as we will read, as you can read in the story, eventually he not only forgives him, but the killer is so moved by the act of forgiveness that he decides to embrace Christianity. And the grandfather, who has lost all of his descendants, takes on the very killer as his spiritual child by becoming his godfather in the sacrament of baptism. Truly a very moving story. And Father Fuentes brings up a very key point that we can spend a lot of time thinking about, which is no one can forgive without suffering, but it is possible. Lastly, we can talk about the grace of forgiveness. Jesus wants to heal our wounds, but he will not force our will. He asks us to, as we read in the 11th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves." And we can think all throughout the Gospels, many come to Jesus for healing, and he encourages them to come to him. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. But to ask means to be willing to pay the price that God asks, which is a change of life, or in other words, a conversion of heart. We can think of a couple healings from the Gospel of John. The blind man, he says, "Look, you are well, do not sin anymore." Or to the adulteress, after all walk away, he says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." This change of heart will require new spiritual habits, or increased fervor in spiritual habits of prayer, frequent reception of the sacraments. and a longing, a striving to God, to union with God, it will also fundamentally require that we practice mercy with our neighbors and to forgive others. Trusting in God's grace, we must know and be convinced the freedom of forgiveness is possible. Thank you, and God bless. We invite you to join us as we journey on this way of forgiveness. To stay updated with these and other formation videos, please subscribe to our channel, The Catholic Voice. Thank you, and God bless.